This is Bosnia and Herzegovina, a nation that is home to perhaps the darkest geopolitical backstory in all of Europe, which is saying a lot. For many, the all too recent memories of conflict represent the high cost of independence from the Socialist Federation of Yugoslavia, a large state in the Western Balkans that no longer exists. The end of the conflict in 1995 triggered the beginning of a colossal economic recovery effort, which not only sought to physically rebuild Bosnia and Herzegovina, but also sought to restructure the economy away from centralised planning and towards free markets. Almost 30 years on, and the nation has transitioned from socialism to capitalism with mixed success. Now an upper middle income economy, Bosnia and Herzegovina is experiencing robust growth in tourism, energy production and metal manufacturing, whilst maintaining low levels of public debt and high capital reserves within its banks. What's more, the country has had a clear goal to work towards, having been formally granted candidate status for the European Union in 2022. This is potentially a win-win situation, with Bosnia and Herzegovina benefiting from increased confidence, market access and participation in supply chains, whilst the EU manages geopolitical risk by befriending a nation with a significant pro-Russia cohort in its population. But regardless of its relationship with the EU, Bosnia and Herzegovina has a number of deeply rooted challenges which have, if anything, worsened since becoming an independent state following the war. Ineffective governance, chronic unemployment, and a steadily declining population are adding tension to a nation divided by ethnic lines who, it is felt by many, have still not reconciled its difficult history. So, how did the newly independent nation bounce back from war and genocide? Why has the economic development of Bosnia and Herzegovina stagnated? And finally, what opportunities and challenges lie ahead for the nation? After we've done all of that, we can put Bosnia and Herzegovina on the Economics Explained leaderboard. Economics is a complex subject because of its interdisciplinary nature that combines mathematics, statistics, geography, history, psychology, and sociology. What is not complex is how easy it is for hackers online to find your data and exploit it for personal gain. That's why we've partnered up with Incogni for this video. All you need to do is grant them the right to work for you, and they'll contact data brokers and use the law to request the removal of your data. When I set up my Incogni, they found 89 places on the internet where nefarious actors could pay to get my email, phone number, and even my home address. Within an hour though, Incogni had removed 26 of the places where people could buy my data and were busy chasing down more of them. You don't need to do anything yourself. Incogni contacts and removes you from lists online so you can get fewer spam emails, robocalls, or even people trying to take out loans in your name. Take your personal data back with Incogni and use code ECONOMICS at the link below to get 60% off an annual plan. For better or more likely worse, it's impossible to understand the modern economy of Bosnia and Herzegovina without at least a cursory understanding of its all too recent history. In the late 1980s and early 1990s, a wave of national sentiment rose across Yugoslavia, which consisted of 6 federations with their own cultures and identities. After Slovenia and Croatia broke away from Yugoslavia, Bosnia and Herzegovina held an independence referendum in 1992. The outcome was in favour of independence, which was largely welcomed by Bosniaks and Bosnian Croats, but rejected by Yugoslavia and Bosnian Serbs, who made up 33% of the population. Conflict broke out shortly after as the different ethnic factions fought for territory in an escalating struggle that eventually led to NATO bombing and UN peacekeeper troop deployment. In total, almost 100,000 people died, 2.2 million people were displaced, and GDP declined by 84%. After international efforts for a peaceful solution, the war ended in 1995 with the signing of the Dayton Agreement in Wright-Patterson Air Force Base in Ohio, USA. And it's this agreement which founded the modern politics and economic powers of Bosnia and Herzegovina to this day. Obviously, that's the incredibly oversimplified summary of an endlessly complex issue, but the takeaway was that this was a bad set of circumstances to begin the process of nation building, especially since a lot of these core issues never truly went away. Founded on a compromise and power sharing, the Dayton Agreement effectively split the state into 2 geographically separate entities. The Federation of Bosnia and Herzegovina in the central, south and west of the state, which is controlled by the Bosniaks and the Bosnian Croats, and the Republic Srpska in the north and the east of the state controlled by the Bosnian Serbs. Because of the Dayton Agreement, power in Bosnia and Herzegovina is highly decentralised, with both of these entities in complete control of their own tax collection, public spending, development policies and welfare programs. The only economic powers that lie at a state level are monetary policy, which is managed by the central bank, foreign trade policy, and macroeconomic coordination. This level of decentralisation for a relatively small country is what makes Bosnia and Herzegovina unique, and it was a requirement for the peace that was desperately needed to enable the economic recovery that followed. It took until 2003 for the GDP of the nation to eventually recover back to levels last seen in 1990, requiring an average annual growth rate of 22% following the end of the war. And yes, much of this growth derives from redeployment of huge spare capacity in the labour market, but even when these factors are accounted for, there's no denying that a 22% average annual growth rate over almost an entire decade is an impressive feat. So how did this recovery actually happen? In the first years of peace, a lot of the recovery can of course be attributed to the vast sums of post-war foreign aid that Bosnia and Herzegovina received from the international community for reconstruction of damaged and destroyed infrastructure, which includes $5.1 billion from the World Bank, the EU, and partner donors. As time went on, however, the economic growth became increasingly driven by the pro-capitalist reforms that constituted the nation's transition from market socialism to private enterprise. To be clear, this transition of economic systems was not as extreme as other countries across Central and Eastern Europe following the collapse of the Berlin Wall and the dissolution of the USSR. As part of Yugoslavia, Bosnia and Herzegovina was already using free markets to allocate production and exchange, with enterprises either being state-owned or worker-owned and managed. In the later half of the 1990s and early 2000s, large state-owned enterprises started to be privatised, which signalled opportunity to European banks who started to provide liquidity and management expertise to the country's newly reformed banking sector. Insolvent banks were closed, state-owned banks were privatised, and new regulatory framework was introduced to drive return on investment and manage systemic risk. Additional private property laws were also introduced alongside the establishment of key institutions such as 2 stock exchanges and the central bank. After the war, many different currencies were circulating with no generally accepted standard of payment, and so a key factor of the recovery was the introduction of a new currency, the convertible mark, in 1998. Not only did it standardise the monetary system, but it also generated financial stability since it was pegged to the Deutschmark and eventually the euro in 1999. A currency is pegged when it has a fixed exchange rate to another currency. The value of the currency is not affected by supply and demand in the foreign exchange market against the peg because the central bank cancels out large movements by counteracting the market when it needs to, using its reserve holdings of both currencies. When there's excess demand for the domestic currency on the market, the central bank will sell some of this domestic currency reserve to match this excess. On the other hand, if there's excess supply of the domestic currency on the market, the central bank will buy the excess using its reserves of the pegged currency. This ensures balance in the markets, preventing the currency from deviating from the currency it's pegged to, and as a result, the Bosnia and Herzegovina economy benefits from the stability that the euro-backed currency brings. Now, it's worth noting that pegged currencies don't always work in practice, and there is some risk involved. Take, for example, the Russian ruble in 1998, which was pegged to the US dollar. Investors were selling the ruble hard and fast, which forced the Central Bank of Russia to buy the ruble using US dollars to defend its currency value. After selling 27 billion of its US dollar reserves in under a year, the central bank ran out of US dollars and the peg finally broke. The ruble devalued by 2/3 in just over a month, which meant the price of imported goods soared, causing inflation and huge drops in real living standards. So far, however, the Bosnian and Herzegovinian central bank has successfully maintained the pegged exchange rate, which has fostered confidence in the currency and attracted significant amounts of foreign investment. This rewrote the nation's narrative from one of post-war recovery to one of rapid modernisation and development. The large inflows of foreign direct investment generated employment, improved infrastructure, and helped to establish key export sectors in the national economy, such as electricity and metal manufacturing. This was a pretty standard and promising development path for a country with close access to both markets in the east and the west. But it didn't last forever. Fast forward to the present day, and foreign direct investment still makes up a huge portion of the economy in Bosnia and Herzegovina, particularly in banking and manufacturing. The latest statistics value the total stock of FDI to be worth about $9.3 billion US dollars. However, net inflows decreased significantly after the 2008 financial crisis, which, like so many other nations, appears to be a turning point for the trajectory of the economy. Private investment from within the country has not picked up this slack either, and the reason for this is that Bosnia and Herzegovina has some of the highest administrative burdens for business, not just across Europe, but across the entire world. In 2020, the World Bank found that there are only 6 countries in the world where registering a new business is more difficult. The country is also ranked 173rd for ease of doing business with construction permits and 141st for paying taxes. Although most recent data is a few years old now, and the country ranks slightly better for other ease of doing business metrics, this is clearly discouraging for both foreign and domestic investors who may not have the time and legal know-how to properly administer their business operations in such a complicated regulatory framework. This explains why Bosnia and Herzegovina has a large informal economy, which is a whole other problem itself. These issues are largely caused by the political system within Bosnia and Herzegovina, which, to put it frankly, is overly complex, fragmented, and ineffective at taking action to drive economic development. While the Dayton Agreement was heralded as a success story of international peace brokering in the modern era during the 1990s, few were thinking ahead to the implications that power sharing would have on the overall functioning of the government in the long term once this peace was achieved. The political complexity begins right at the top with a tripartite political leadership structure. Every 4 years, 3 presidents are elected who represent each of the ethnic constituents of the nation: Bosniaks, Bosniak Croats, and Bosniak Serbs. These 3 presidents rotate every 8 months until the 4-year term is over, and each one has veto power to block decisions which they believe are against the interests of their ethnic group. This high degree of power sharing has embedded political friction into the government from the top down, preventing political solutions and slowing the legislative process. So, whilst this political structure has undoubtedly helped sustain peace, it has created an ineffective government that's unable to foster entrepreneurship. This has reduced investment, causing spare capacity in the labour market, where the unemployment rate is 10.7%. This has dropped significantly since 2015, where the rate was 27.7%. Taking these statistics at face value, you might think the declining unemployment rate would be a positive sign, but the reality for Bosnia and Herzegovina is that this has been driven by a shrinking labour force as working age adults leave the country to find employment elsewhere. The scale of the issue is demonstrated by the fact that Bosnia and Herzegovina has one of the largest emigrant to population ratios in the world, causing a reliance on remittances for economic growth rather than investment into its own economy. Perhaps even more concerningly, emigration is leading to population decline, with the total population having already decreased by 23% since 2000. So, given such a steep decline of fundamental economic factors, is there any hope for the future? In order to reverse, or at the very least slow, the exodus of productive workers, Bosnia and Herzegovina needs to improve its economic offer to its citizens by increasing the quality and quantity of jobs available. Ask most macroeconomists and they will say that investment is the key to achieving this. Fortunately for the nation, there looks to be capacity for ramping this up. Currently, the capital adequacy ratio of the banking sector, which controls the level of risk and the ability to protect depositors, sits at 19.5%. This is well above the regulatory minimum of 12%, which means the domestic banking sector could increase long-term funding to key growth areas in the economy such as energy, metal manufacturing and IT. To do this, however, three things need to happen. First, the discouragingly high administrative burdens of operating a business need to be reduced to incentivise entrepreneurship. Some efforts have already been taken to address this through the digitisation of tax filing and customs declarations for trade, but more widespread reforms are needed to significantly reduce administration and encourage entrepreneurship. Secondly, corruption in the political system and the banking sector needs to be addressed in order for capital to be more effectively deployed in the economy. Thirdly, the government must ensure that state-owned enterprises and public sector spending are not crowding out private investment. This final point is particularly important since the state is a huge economic power, with fiscal revenues making up 44% of GDP, and state-owned enterprises having a presence larger than they do in any other country in the Western Balkans. Clearly, Bosnia and Herzegovina's transition to a market economy only went so far, with the state still having significant ownership stakes in over 550 enterprises. This is also likely to be an important point of future discussions on advancing its membership prospects with the European Union. This represents a historic opportunity for the nation that would increase confidence and enable more participation in value-added supply chains. So far, the nation has made good progress towards EU integration since becoming a candidate in 2022, especially having introduced new anti-corruption laws. In light of this progress, the European Commission has recommended that advanced negotiations begin with Bosnia and Herzegovina to plan and agree on a pathway to its full membership. While this is promising, it's not likely that the nation will become a member for many years to come. It took Croatia 8 years from this stage to become a member, whilst Turkey has been in negotiations for almost 20 years. Point being, there's no guarantee of becoming a member once the nation gets to this stage, and with the range of political and economic challenges that Bosnia and Herzegovina possesses, the wait could be one to test the limits of political patience. What's more is that EU membership alone will not fix the country's issues. Just ask Greece, Spain and Portugal. Bosnia and Herzegovina has immense potential, but it has to do more than just strive for compromise to get there. Okay, now it's time to put Bosnia and Herzegovina on the Economics Explained national leaderboard. In terms of size, Bosnia and Herzegovina has a GDP of $27 billion, which means most national economies are larger. It ranks amongst Trinidad and Tobago and Zimbabwe, giving it a 2 out of 10. That is spread across a population of 3.2 million people, which means the GDP per capita is $8,426, which puts it below the global average and a long way away from the EU average, giving the economy a 4 out of 10. Stability and confidence is a mixed picture. While the central bank has maintained the currency peg with the euro and the public debt levels are low, the declining population and ineffective government are weakening the confidence in the economy. On top of this, ethnic divisions are beginning to stir up again as political leaders from the Serb territory of the nation increasingly challenge the legitimacy of the central government and call for their own independence. In light of this, it gets a 5 out of 10. Growth is steady, averaging 3% since 2000, but it has all but stagnated since the 2008 financial crisis, so it gets a 5 out of 10. And finally, industry. Bosnia and Herzegovina has a solid manufacturing base, especially in metal and electricity production. However, the economy remains a net importer, and there is room to further develop its industry and increase productivity and exports. It gets a 4 out of 10. Overall, this gives Bosnia and Herzegovina an average score of 4 out of 10, putting it down here on the leaderboard. If you like this video, then you'll also like the video we did on the economy of Turkey, which covers similar themes of how different political and economic systems affect production, inequality, and growth. Thanks for watching, mate. Bye.